I do this. All right. Mm, okay. This is KTVB7, which I guess is in Idaho. I don't know. Bill that bans youth transgender treatments in Idaho as to Senate. Teens aren't ready for that, the bill's author said. Opponents argue that it would lead to problems and possibly deaths among those wanting to transition. So, yeah, this is a lot of fun stuff here. We have in Boise, Idaho. Boise, Idaho, House Bill 675 would prohibit gender confirmation medical treatment for anyone under the age of 18. The bill would place a ban on surgery, puberty blockers, and hormone treatments that are used to assist in gender transition. This bill is about protecting children. Which is a legitimate state interest. We do that all of the time, said Representative Bruce Skog, Republican, from, I guess, Nampa, Idaho. We need to stop sterilizing mutilated children under the age of 18. The bill is not about the adults or adult trans community at all. It's about children. It's about the children, guys. About the children. According to Skog, author of HB 675, in 2019, the legislature unanimously passed what is now Idaho Code 18-1506B. Oh boy. Outlawing genital mutilation of a female child and imposing a felony penalty. Today, he asked the law amended to include boys and girls. Okay. I get it. All right, so they have a genital mutilation bill. We got a genital mutilation bill because that's a thing, right? You know, I guess like female circumcision. So hold on. Okay, wait a minute. I mean, genital mutilation, I'm guessing it's a female circumcision. Did they make an exception for male circumcision? It does that not count as genital mutilation under this? Can we do that? Is that part? I'm guessing that's not part of the deal. Oh boy. I'm guessing. If we do not allow minors to get tattoos, smoke cigarettes, and drink alcohol or sign legal contracts, why would we allow them to make decisions to cut away organs based on their feelings during puberty times? Gog said. That's wrong. They're not ready for that. Some lawmakers think this would only delay the process for the trans youth, making the transition process potentially problematic as they get older. Allowing puberty to run its course changes the body in profound and irreversible ways, said Representative Alana Rubel from Boise. Says you say you are doing a male to female transition, whether you do the transition when you're 5'7" or whether you do it when you are 6'3" with giant shoulders and an Adam's apple. It's really going to impact you for the next 70 years of your life and how successful that transition is. Bree Latimer is a trans woman and a student at Boise State University who says this bill will only harm trans youth. According to Latimer, her hormone placement and puberty blockers changed her life for the better. Once you go through therapy, you figure out all these different things about yourself. Things finally start making sense in hindsight, and then taking that step to start hormone replacement or puberty blockers at that point, I feel like you are more sure about your identity than you have been in your entire life, Latimer said. Latimer worries that experts and parents don't listen to trans youth and give them the opportunity of choice, more suicides will occur. When they bring it to their parents and their therapists and their doctors saying, I know who I am now and I want to pursue this path, that's when we really need to listen, because a lot of the times those kids aren't looking to make it to 18 if that's the choice they want to make, she said. However, some lawmakers believe this bill could save the youth and their parents from making a decision that could regret in years to come. Parents don't always make the perfect decision on behalf of their kids, and this would be one of those cases. I wouldn't recommend having this kind of decision. This kind of decision. It's a terrible thing to have to go through. I have a lot of empathy for the families, but at the same time, I want to express that I don't feel that kids are cognitively ready to make those kind of decisions. Senator Representative Marco Erickson, Idaho Falls, House Bill 675 passed on the House floor Tuesday by a vote of 55 to 13. Representative Fred Wood, R. Burley, joined all 12 Democrats in voting against the bill. Representative Scott Simi, and Representative Julie Yamamoto were absent, did not cast votes. The bill now heads to the Senate. Now heads to the Senate? I thought this was, yeah, I guess this. Oh, okay. Oh, it heads to the Senate. All right. So it's Idaho House passes it. I kept reading that, and somehow I thought the Senate passed it, not the House. All right, that's my fault. Let me change the stream title. That's my fault. I really thought the. All right, whatever. Doesn't matter. But you get it. All right. Uncooked dicks are better. Roshi, are you telling us something about your husband? Is that what you're doing? All right, so yeah, we're gonna have a conversation about this, and we'll go forward from there. I'm just looking at what you guys are saying in chat. Yeah, some dubbing online, especially when news sites have video that has nothing to do with the article. Oh, it fucking kills me. All right. Anyway. The article. Oh, you want the link to this article? I can give you that. Chinchilla. There you go. Oh man, this is a link. Holy shit, guys. Do better. That link is hideous. That link is fucking hideous. Yeah, it's really yeah, Ashley, it's terrible how they worded this. Scrolling down, radical and destructive debate board says radical and destructive public policies are pushed by radical ideologies, and then as here legitimized by co-believers in the professional literature. These articles in turn influence judges deciding relevant cases around public bureaucrats and public culture. I'm not exactly sure what we're referring to. The issue with this is the standards of care are against transgender surgeries for age of consent, so grouping surgery and puberty blockers in the same exact thing is painful. Yeah. All right, so I guess we'll just why don't we just jump into it? So I'm gonna start with. Actually, give me 1 second. I gotta work something out. Hopefully, I will get a response soon. Okay, all right, so hey Ashley, if you want to jump in, why don't we have a private discussion first, and then we'll let in everyone else. Okay, well, let's do a private discussion with trans individuals, and then we'll let in like the rest. Okay, so we'll do like, you know, talk to people who are affected by this first before moving on. Okay. All right. So jump into the waiting room, Ashley. If you're around, let me know if you're available. Ashley said she'd talk with us about this. So hopefully, okay, that's great. She's there. All right. Give me a second, everyone. 1 quick second. Yeah. Put that there. One second. One second. All together. Okay. Hello. Hi, everyone. Hey, nice to meet you. Hey, Ashley. You hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Hello, Comrade Rain. Our friend Chinchilla said
Hello.
you wanted to join in. Hi.
Yeah.
Hi. Do you have a camera?
I'm getting it set up right now.
Okay. Okay. All right. So let's jump in. Okay. All right. Hello. Hi.
Hi.
So thanks for being here. We're talking about the Idaho House bill that is banning and transitioning, basically. So, what are your opinions?
Who
Whichever,
wants to go first?
whichever.
I could go or you could go. I don't mind.
Okay. Okay. I got a little bit of echo. That's better. Sorry, I'm just getting set up for this.
I can
Okay.
start if you like.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So basically, to my knowledge and what I've read on it is kind of banning the it's banning transgender healthcare for teens. Um and it's making it a felony, right? That's a big deal already. It's not just banning it and saying, hey, this isn't allowed. It's making it a felony. You will actively get into serious legal trouble for doing this, and if you leave state to do it, it's equally a felony. But it seems like they're linking puberty blockers with genital surgery. So my main issue with the bill and why I would stand by it is genital surgery. Sorry, I'm bad at words as well. Genital surgery is like a completely different thing than HRT, and it should be treated as such because one, generally we're not okay with being done pre-18, and the other we are in the Standards of Care, which is written by the WPATH, and the ICD-11 by the World Health Organization. Tends to agree with that. The idea that HRT is fine pre-age of consent, but surgery is not necessarily. So to ban surgery, it's definitely not something that's really done, but I'm for that. That's a fine thing. Like that's a fine thing to do. But then to ban HRT is really strange. It's a treatment that is used, puberty blockers especially. It's a treatment that's used that is supported by science to like be fully reversible. Now, the thing that people will point to is bone mineral density, but that reverses after 10 years. So it is a fully reversible treatment, and that also doesn't affect a significant amount of people.
Okay.
So it's a fully reversible treatment that is done to trans kids that don't have that high a detransition rate, and the earlier they get treatment, the better their outcomes are by a significant margin. There's been studies on the comorbidity of mental illness being insanely low if you're given proper trans healthcare at an early age. Whereas if you're denied it, your suicide rate will increase, your mental illnesses alongside being trans, like your comorbidity of mental illnesses goes really high up. But you'll actually see like normal tendencies of like, I say normal, but like same as the average population in terms of suicide rate and mental health or mental disorders and stuff. You'll generally see that at the same rate in trans kids if they're validated from an early age. If they're denied and they go through male puberty, if they're a trans woman, then that can lead to them not having, like, being somewhat mentally ill more so. And it just seems like it's a good idea to generally support trans kids as if it was a like surgery almost. Like if you get a broken knee as a kid, are we meant to say, oh no, it like my religion says you shouldn't touch your knee, so or you shouldn't fix your knee, so you just have to limp for like up to 16 years or whatever until like you're at the age of consent. Like it doesn't make sense to limit healthcare to kids when it's well studied. Yeah, it like doesn't have that severe side effects, and even with the side effects, it seems to have better outcomes. That's overall my point on it and my sense.
Rain, European. What are your pronouns too?
My pronouns are they, them. Thank you for asking. So, I tend to agree with you, but I approach it from a slightly different angle. in that I don't want people's rights to transition to be able to be revoked if the science disagrees um, with it being good. I personally rather think of it as a moral position in which I am principally opposed to any actions which disempower individuals from being able to have agency over their own bodies and over their own lives. Like, personally, I do think that the argument that transitioning is good for people to be like a reasonably strong argument. And I do like the argument that puberty blockers are reversible, but that's just not how I think about it. I think about it from like a principled moral stance, where I don't think anyone has the right to take the ability to transition from people, because I don't believe that it's right to remove any degree of agency from an individual, if that makes sense.
Okay. Hmm. Okay. I feel like other people would relate this to other issues about agency. But I guess before doing anything like that, we'll focus in on this. Um, so, uh, do you think the state though can say, we aren't sure if people are doing these things responsibly, and just to be sure, right? Just to be safe, and just in the interest of children, let's step in and help regulate this.
Mm-hmm.
I would personally say that it would depend on how it's being done, right? So this bill isn't doing that. It's not trying to actually solve the issue. It's trying to destroy trans kids. That's what it's trying to do. If it was trying to solve the issue, you could even say, hey, let's not give kids estrogen. Anyone under the age of 18 can't have estrogen or testosterone, like any of the hormonal part of HRT. But puberty blockers is just something completely different. That just allows you to delay the decision, and it lets you not have to go through the trauma of having to go through like a puberty of a gender that you don't identify with. Mm-hmm. So if you want to promote like be responsible, you just do that, because you can just have a late onset, or you can have like a medically assisted puberty later, and that would be fine.
A medically assisted puberty. Could you talk about that? I've never heard of that before.
You could just like, so what it is at around age 20, that's when if you go off puberty blockers, you won't get full puberty. So then you could just have like take hormones to help you through it. So like if I was a cis guy, but I thought I was a trans woman, right? I might take puberty blockers, and later I could start taking testosterone if my puberty was not to start up after I got off puberty hormone.
Okay.
Puberty blockers. I'm sorry, I'm bad at words.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I had not heard of that.
It's not really done because usually you'll know that you're not trans at a much earlier age, and you'll get off of puberty blockers, right? It's not like when we're talking about this, we're not usually it's around the age of 16, at least that I've seen in my experience. Doctors have been willing to prescribe HRT, like the hormone part of HRT.
Mm-hmm.
But give or take, and you're generally not going to have like 18-year-olds that are getting off puberty blockers. That's not that common.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting because I hadn't heard of that, and I think an argument that I've heard often is that, well, these puberty blockers are going to affect you for the rest of your life, because you only have a certain amount of time to do puberty. But if you're saying that you can have an assisted puberty, then
it's not perfect. So you would ideally want it from ages like 13 to 18 to start. So it's not perfect. So the longer you wait, the worse it gets. But so it is an issue if you probably want to sort it out before age 18. But you could later. It's just not. It is not as potent. So I do understand that argument past age 18.
It seems like the crux of the disagreement is with the sorting out part, right? That a person who was of that young age can't actually sort these things out, can't actually um make a decision. I think it seems like when it comes to the identity, uh, the big argument from people who at least pretend like they're not bigots, are that the this is like any other identity that kids try out when they are young, right? Like being emo. This is one that comes to mind. I don't know, right? Like going through an emo phase or something. Like that's something that you can pick up, you can examine, see if that's something you want, and then put down later. And so they're relating those two things. Like fashion sense. You want to be a preppy, you want to be like whatever, right? So what do you say to that? Yeah, either of you.
So I hear that argument and I can understand where they're coming from, but I think it's a bit ludicrous in that taking on these like different subcultural identities doesn't necessarily prevent you from like getting a job or getting proper health care. It doesn't necessarily like it could potentially get you disowned from your family if you have like a particularly nasty family, but it doesn't seem like terribly out of the ordinary for people to disown their children over like trans stuff. Not that this is not like a saying that's okay. It's just it seems to be a relatively common thing whereas disowning one's children for like adopting subcultural identities seems to be less so. So I think that the comparison, while not necessarily made in bad faith, isn't really accurate per se.
Okay,
So,
Ashley.
the detransition rate at the highest, the studies that put it the highest, is under 4% still. So, when we're talking about this, we should keep in note that it's usually between 1 and 2%, but the highest is at 4%. So, it's pretty fair to say that even for kids, they have a good knowledge of their gender identity from an early age. I think the earliest age that people start to identify as trans and be pretty certain in it to the point of where like they're within the normal detransition rate is around 3.
Is 3?
Age 3.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's how early you can identify the differences in or the intricacies of your gender identity.
That's quite curious.
Okay.
I can send you that.
Yeah, I would like to see that. I was about to look it up actually. That sounds very
Okay.
interesting.
Well, you can look it up. I have it somewhere in my folder, so it's gonna take me a second.
Mhm.
But if you want to look for it while I get that.
Yeah, so that's fascinating that but on it, I guess the response to saying, well, this is not the same as picking up different subcultures or subcultural identities, um is that, well, those subcultural identities don't involve medical procedures, right? You don't go to a doctor for
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
go ahead.
Kind of what I was trying to insinuate with that is that picking up the subcultural identities doesn't require nearly as much effort on the part of the individual picking up the subcultural identity, nor does it have like the same kind of negative social effects that transitioning could possibly have when regards to like interacting with bigots.
Yeah.
So I think that
Right.
the reason why the comparison isn't apt is because of the degree to which each of these things will potentially affect your life negatively. And I think that in regards to being trans, nobody would willingly take on the oppression that comes with being trans. Whereas with a subcultural identity, it's something to a small enough degree to where any degree of like bad action performed on the person of the subcultural identity is entirely mitigated by the increase in like personal artistic expression that they might have. I don't know if I'm like explaining that like my thought process properly. Like being trans has way more of an effect on your life, like way more negative. So I don't think it's like a willing thing Like it appears that nobody would want to do that like on purpose for funsies. Whereas people might want to enter a subculture on purpose for funsies or whatever, because like any degree of oppression that they might experience from expressing themselves in such a way isn't going to ruin their life.
Mm, is it a? Do you think transgenders are a thing?
I think it's possible. Like it's a plausibility, but I don't think it's like very much of a widespread phenomenon. I don't think anybody would like willingly take on that social oppression,
Hmm.
So,
or at least not like a large number of people.
and I think that even if you're even if we assume that this is the case, I don't think like somebody that's just trending transgender would go through any like hormonal replacement. I don't
Yeah,
think that they would do that.
I think by the point you start to go through like HRT or like puberty blockers or anything like that, there's a whole lot more going on than like being a trender.
Hmm.
Sorry about the stutter.
No, no, it's fine. Hmm. Uh. Okay, so I'm trying to argue this from the other side when I'm not obviously not on the other side, but uh so you but the state has an interest of protecting uh children, right? Like you agree.
Maybe.
You don't think the state has a interest of protecting children?
To an extent, I don't necessarily think that this specifically is about protecting children. It more seems to be like conservative fear mongering about protecting the global hegemony.
But in the end, does the state have an interest?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. When
I think right now, like in the US, generally, yes. Like our state specifically. Like as in the US.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So they do. Um and do you think it's possible to make bad decisions when dealing with medical procedures involving children, right? So putting surgery aside, do you think it's a well, actually, no, pulling surgery in, right? Because if it's not illegal, then technically someone could, right? If it's just recommendation, then someone could have a surgery below the age of 18, correct?
I would be for blocking that if that was a concern or that was a serious thing that was shown to happen. I would be for like putting laws in place against that. Not
Okay.
to say that I personally believe that you would even like I might be willing to like be a bit lenient on it myself if I was like running the state because I understand that like the detransition rate is so low. But I wouldn't be against putting a law and saying, hey, you can't have surgery before 18. I don't think that that's major, personally at least.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that in that I don't think elective surgery should necessarily be something that you can personally opt into before 18. However, I do think that if you have like the corroborated opinions of like doctors and your parents and whatnot, like the people around you, it might be something worth considering.
Okay, so you wouldn't ban surgery.
Not outright.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I would say yes, we should have it, but with conditions.
And Ashley, you disagree?
I wouldn't disagree with that necessarily. I would say if we want to be really careful and we made protections on it where we just said you have to be over 18 period, I wouldn't be against that. I personally would probably say that I think that could be or I would personally say from my understanding of this, somebody could get it before 18 and be fine. And like given that doctors agree with it. Given that multiple, because right now you need, I believe, 2 PhD letters, 2 letters from PhD doctors for 18. So if we were to do it under 18, we could just put more requirements. Maybe you need 4 PhD doctors, right? Or something. Like I think you could. I think that I'm not a scientist myself, so and I'm not a sociologist or a psychologist, so I would say that I'd leave it to them. But if they were to say after age 18, I'd be fine with that. If they were to say, well, we think after like 4 PhD psychologists or psychiatrists, like you could be fine, then yeah, I would trust them on that. I generally am going with like the ICD-11 and the DSM for my rulings on this.
So
Okay, go ahead, please.
I have a thought on that, in that sometimes the requirement for having like the PhD letters to be able to approach transitioning for someone over 18 is used to oppress trans people and to prevent them from transitioning. So that's where I draw an issue with that. Also, someone in my chat brought something up that's interesting. In Germany, hormone therapy and puberty blockers are legal. Age is decided by the doctors. Commonly, hormone treatment starts at the age of 14, and the youngest cases of surgical procedures for gender-affirming care was 15 years old. So I thought that was quite interesting, and I wanted to share that. Oh, thank you for the follow.
Okay. So okay, so we have so you're saying personally, okay, Ashley, you were saying personally you think transitioning before 18 is fine. But in terms of the law has to be applied to protect the greatest number of people, right?
Yeah.
So
I would just follow the DSM-5 and the ICD-11 current guidelines, which
Okay.
say after 18 you're fine.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. I think that I could see a psychologist I could see somebody that's very, very well versed in this stuff saying, oh, well, we think that you could do it at 17 given like 4 PhDs or 3 PhDs looking you over, right? Like that's what I'm saying. I don't think like 18 is this magic number where after this you're suddenly fine. So I understand banning it until you're 18. Like I would just say that the line is not easily drawn there. There's not a specific age where I would say, going by the data, it's clear at this exact age you have this understanding. It's like,
yeah, age of consent.
Yeah.
Wow, it's always
Yeah,
a fun
I'm
conversation.
not trying to make an argument
I know
against
it's
the
always,
age of consent.
but it always
I'm not
does.
trying to.
I know, but it literally always comes down to that. Go ahead.
It's kind of like hard to draw a line in the sand, like this is the age at which you should have bodily autonomy or whatever, like in regards to like medical freedom or whatever. And I don't know how comfortable I am with like necessarily decreasing the medical freedom of people who are under 18 to that degree. That's basically where my contentions come from. I think that like if you have people in good standing within your life who are able to corroborate the fact that you are trans, like that should potentially be enough before you're 18. Like maybe have it be a thing where like the way it works with adults now could be how it works with pre-18 people after like this societal change or whatever. But that would also be under the condition that people who are over 18 can just kind of like get elective procedures done as they see fit, because I don't think we should be gatekeeping to that degree over people being able to do things that will engender like positive actions on their own part within their life. And I worry about the potential consequences of instilling that kind of gatekeeping and like the potential negative effects that it could have in the future.
Can I answer this coconut strawberry person?
Oh boy, coconut strawberry. He's one of our more active chatters. Well, go ahead.
I personally would think that like I personally might be a bit uncomfortable with that.
Could you say the question and then?
Oh, sorry. So if 4 PhDs signed off on a 12-year-old, would you all be okay with it, right? In reference to gain surgery. And what I would say is, I don't value my personal feelings on that. I would go with the APA or the World Health Organization. I would use their standards. Their standards right now are saying that over 18. But I would personally just say, from reading the data, it doesn't seem like that's like a hard line that we need to follow. So I would just say that I expect it to change in the future to be a bit more forgiving, like maybe 16. But I'm saying that there's no clear line in the data that I've read that shows this is the age, at this age, this is when it becomes okay. So I would just say that like the World Health Organization or the APA or the AMA, if any of those three, or any other reputable medical association decided to lower the age at which you could get it, I would not be against that, because I don't see any reason to be against that.
Okay.
Mhm.
So if if you're appealing to authority, if they said like, okay, new research has come out, and this is more damaging than we thought, and maybe you have to wait till you're 25, would you also follow that? Would you also defer to that?
Going by the current day, I wouldn't think that's likely, but yes, I actually would follow that.
Okay. Despite everything else personally, you would.
In my personal experience, I would not follow that at all, but I would also understand that I am one person. I may have had a very unique experience. I would follow the experts on this.
Okay. All right.
When we're dealing with medical procedures like a major surgery, right? Like I've personally gotten SRS, right? And I would say that like it showed me new levels of pain that I had never known existed. It was recovering from SRS is pretty traumatic. So I can understand that if experts said, hey, we shouldn't do this until a later age, I could understand that. Now, I would say going by the current data, it does not seem like that's the case, and I would worry about the increase in suicide rates in the transgender community. But I also am going, well, if they're looking at that and they're still saying that the risk is so significant that they would move it there, then I would trust them though.
Okay.
Because it currently seems to be, at least with the data, a clear consensus, right? I think that in the Cornell overview of this, all right, and like surgery regrets, it was, I forget the exact number of studies that they did, but they found 4 that were not directly for it. And here, let me get the number. I can quickly grab this.
So while waiting for that, so we can agree that the state has interest in protecting children, that surgery below 18, at least according to the experts, or the guidance, is not advised, but as it stands, they could still do it. And so combined with that, then it would make sense to have a bill that would felonize surgeries below 18.
Are you asking me?
I'm asking anyone. Anyone? Sure.
No, I don't think it makes sense, because I think that even if their interest was in protecting children, they can still be wrong. I think that you're not necessarily protecting someone by removing their ability to make decisions over their own life, because I think that removing someone's right to choose is harm, if that makes sense. Like, I think that felonizing the right for people below 18 to get care that would make them more comfortable within their own skin, or would allow them to express themselves and grow as a person to the greatest degree possible, would be harming their ability to become their best self, more or less. So I think even if you were to argue that, well, they're doing it to protect the children, I think that they aren't protecting the children by doing this. I think they're harming them.
Okay.
So I did go and get this. So Cornell did a overview. I'm not sure that you would call it a meta study, because it's not a formal meta study, but it was an overview of about 51 studies, right? I think they went to 78 total, but they included their overview on 51 specific studies, right? Oh, specifically around transition and if it improves your life, right? And like if your suicide rate goes down. And what they found is 4 studies contained mixed or null findings, and the rest fully agreed that transition was good, and like decreased suicide rates, improved quality of life. So the 4 didn't even say that it was bad or like it had negative effects. It just said that it wasn't shown that it had major positives. But every other study said that it had positive. So it seems like
Okay.
gender transition is very, like, as we currently have it, improves quality of life.
Can I ask you a question? If studies were to corroborate, like, if the studies were not that, and if the studies in fact stated that transitioning was bad for the individual transitioning, would you then be against it, or would you still be for transitioning?
It would depend on the nature of the studies, right? It would depend on what they're actually saying. But let's assume that they say transgenderism is a mental illness and
Hmm.
right, let's assume the worst. It says that transgenderism is a mental illness and that like transitioning makes your life way worse and you regret it always, right? Or like high
Hmm.
regret, right? I just
Right.
yeah, I would be for that. I would stand by that.
Okay,
But
keep
you
going.
would stand by the studies,
Yeah.
or oh, okay.
I would stand by the in this type of in this well researched field, yes, I would stand by the experts. And if the
Okay.
experts disagreed with me, yeah, it would kind of suck because given my current
Hmm.
lifestyle, it would probably be hurtful. But yes, I would stand
Hmm.
by the experts.
Yeah, I
Okay.
guess I just kind of have to disagree with that
That's
there,
fine.
and that, like, yeah, I don't know. I have a principled opposition to like removing agency from people.
So I want to expand this to the rest, everyone else. So Xmish put open in chat if you guys want to join. Um, I want us to open this up. I'm gonna move you guys to the other room. And then we'll go from there. All right.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and if other people want to join in, that'll be fine. So I'll do that. Give me one moment. Okay. Oops. Oh my God, what just happened? I can't click on things. But guys, if you want to join in, um, again, if you guys want to join in, there it is.
Hi there.
Hey, hi. All right. Cameras, everyone. Uh,
Behold.
yeah. So, jump in, guys at home. At home, at wherever the fuck you guys are. You guys want to be a part of this? Exclamation open. You can be a part of the conversation. All right. Let's go here. All right. So we have Guy. Hey, Guy.
How we doing, Brian?
Hey. I'm doing fine. Please tell me, what are your thoughts?
Well, so I used to live in Idaho. I don't live there anymore. I've read over this bill a little bit, and it is a bit of a confusing bill. There's a lot of things that I'm not sure, like, would technically fall under this, like normal male circumcision. Like, from the verbiage, almost seems like that would be illegal also. But a lot of the verbiage of the bill seems to have to do with female reproductive organs without mentioning any male reproductive organs in the entire thing. So I think
Mhm.
that this bill is really poorly created. I do understand like what they're trying to do with it and what they're trying to stop people from doing. And again, I think that there may be some sort of validity to some of what they're trying to do. But again, this is a very poor execution of what they want to do, I think. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
I mean, go into more detail. Like,
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So, from my understanding, and again, I am not anti-trans by any means. I think that people that want to go through some sort of a surgery to better align with their own identities, I think this is generally a good thing. I have heard arguments in the past from people on the right, though, that in a case where the parents are divorced and one of the two parents wants the child to go through transitioning, the other parent doesn't want to go through transitioning, there's a little bit of uh, hesitancy there. The father feels like, or the parent that doesn't want this to occur feels like they don't have any recourse or any way to stop something from happening if the other parent has full custody over the child. The state is kind of trying to step in to defend the parent that doesn't have custody in this case, which again is a little bit strange. This bill targets the physicians, so it doesn't look like we are penalizing trans people for wanting to transition. We're penalizing doctors who offer transition surgeries to their patients. particularly if they're under 18. But the most gross part of this bill, in my opinion, is the puberty blockers aspect of it. But also, Idaho is a small state. Thank goodness people can get over a state line and go find a different doctor that isn't going to get charged with a felony if they do want to go through with these things. But that does complicate things quite a bit.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Pretty sure. I'll double check the bill, but I'm pretty sure when I did my initial read through, it said something about crossing state lines still being a felony. So I think it actually targets the parent. That was my understanding of the bill.
But again, does the bill like criminalize the child or the parent, or is it?
I think it
just
criminalizes the parent. That's what it seems.
Okay, I might have misunderstood that. I thought that this was kind of like
it's knowingly engaged. I agree that the bill's poorly written. I would argue that based on what it says, it could apply to parents and how it's worded, because it's knowingly allowing these practices to be done. So it is engaging in them, but it might also mean a physician.
I'm not sure how exactly like this would be enforced, because I mean, how are doctors or how are police finding out about these things? Doesn't HIPAA kind of run into this and go, well, this is a medical procedure that I undertook in a different state and it's none of your business?
No, there's no way HIPAA would protect you against something that is considered to be illegal, right? Like, there could be all kinds of medical procedures, but like maybe things that are considered risky or dangerous, and I doubt HIPAA could ever protect you against necessarily that. I mean, if specifically, I guess if there was an inquiry, then they can inquire into that. It would be pretty obvious too if you started down this path, right? So
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah, I don't see how they could protect you.
So line 34 of the bill says, quote, except as provided in subsection 45 of this section, whoever knowingly gives permission for or permits a child any act prohibited by subsection 1 of this section shall be guilty of a felony.
Okay.
So a parent, I think, would be liable under that, because they would be permitting their child to undergo this.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Did you give me the direct link to the
Sure, I can send that on.
I put it in the chat earlier, Prime, for you too.
Oh, thank you. It's only 2 pages.
Yeah.
I feel like something like this should be longer.
Yeah.
Right. So you said which section did you just read?
On line 34 of the first page. Okay. But even on the second page, I think it has something. Yeah.
Except as provided in subsection 45 of this section, whoever knowingly gets permission for or permits a child active. This section should be guilty of a felony. Yeah, I mean, it does seem like, it seems like it's absolutely be applied to anyone.
Yeah, so it seems like they're not against you doing this with intersex people. That's what the second page seems to clarify. Line 13. So they're not against gender confirmation surgery and regarding people that are intersex.
And again, I guess from my personal opinion, the only issue that I really have with this bill is the fact that it stopped puberty blockers. I'm not 100% sure where I stand on if people under the age of 18 should be allowed to go through gender confirmation surgery. I don't have children. I'm not in that situation, so I haven't made that moral distinction for myself yet. But again, I feel like puberty blockers should be something people should have access to, and while it is an additional hurdle to have to cross a state line to obtain those, I don't feel like that would be as easy to prove and therefore harder to get a charge against parents or children that have decided that that's what they want to do.
Don't mind me, by the way. I am rereading the text of the bill.
So, great. if anyone else wants to join in, jump on in. We'd love to have you. So do you think that cis people should be able to be making these decisions for people who aren't, right? Like, does it bother you? Just like, moving away just from a governmental perspective, the idea that people who are cis and who don't go through this, don't go through any of this, would know best as to what to do.
So again, that's kind of a hard one. I use a vaporizer. I used to smoke cigarettes, and it always seemed like non-smokers were passing all the laws for what smokers could and couldn't do. And again, I didn't feel very comfortable with that. But as I've grown up, I've come to understand that, well, we as a society kind of have to make choices for everybody in the society. So yeah, people that are cis that have not gone through this before, again, someone like myself, I'm very apprehensive to like level my judgment because I haven't gone through these sorts of things before. But at some point, I do feel like everybody in society needs to be involved in the decision-making process for all of society if a decision is going to be made. We can't just go, well, this doesn't involve you, so we don't care what your opinion is. Maybe.
I would agree with you. And I would just say that it very much depends on the type of person making the decision. If it is somebody that has not looked into any of the data and is cis, like that it's or somebody that hasn't looked into any of the data and is trans, I would be against those equally because they would both go for a very I don't want to be like a centrist on trans issues. That feels wrong. But no, I would just say that like I think that the main people that we should be looking to are experts in the field. And I would stand by that.
I concur, but law, like doctors don't pass laws.
Of course, I'm just saying that well-informed people that have read into what the experts have recommended and follow the expert guidelines, I would be for that.
See, I don't think that that's necessarily great relying on the recommendations of experts, because said experts can be infiltrated by bad actors who would willingly falsify study results in order to disadvantage people that they don't like. I think that we could probably find historical precedent for this being true. So don't necessarily know if that's a great metric to rely on, which is why, like, in cases like these, I tend to fall back to my moral grounding as opposed to like necessarily deferring to expertise or like reading studies or anything like that, because we've seen before that if the zeitgeist becomes such that would disadvantage a certain group of people, then relying on the experts means that they are also prone to the same biases that the hegemon or zeitgeist or what have you are prone to. And that's where I think it can be kind of dangerous. You know what I mean? Like, if, say, back in like the 40s or whatever, like 90% of studies corroborated that a certain ethnic group were like objectively bad and should be excised, I wouldn't agree with those studies. Like, I wouldn't use those, even though 90% of experts agreed with that. It's because I have a moral grounding that like prohibits that kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's why I would look to multiple organizations in regards to this. I would look to multiple studies, and I think that if you're looking around the world, right, and you're looking at something like, for instance, the World Health Organization, looking at studies that come from all over Europe, that come from all over the U.S., that come from, I think that there's even some that come from South America, and some that come from Canada. You kind of get a sense of not the whole world. I don't think there's been studies that have come from many from Asia, but you don't get a sense of the whole world, but you get a much broader sense. And if they're all saying the exact same thing, I'm a lot more willing to take that. And I would agree with you if, like, the US specifically had studies that said that 90% of them said something like, oh, this ethnic group is lesser in ways, right? I might be skeptical of that given the fact that, like, I wouldn't think that to be true. But again, I would just say that like when we have like around the world studies saying the exact same thing, I'm inclined to believe that.
Mm-hmm.
As long as it's not coming all from the same country, all from the same culture, I would be for it. For following it.
Well, there are certain aspects of culture that seem to be like not necessarily fairly universal, but there are certain things, certain ideas that kind of get spread and seem to get spread around the entire world. Like, I think homophobia is a really good example. It's like, sure, there might have been like certain individual cultures that were pro-gay when the rest of the world was like ostensibly homophobic, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those like one or two cultures
and
that are
for
pro-gay
food and
are the
water.
ones that are
It's
wrong.
2022 and you had to melt snow for water.
So I don't think that like consensus is necessarily a great thing to fall back on, because the consensus could be wrong.
I agree that the consensus could be wrong given I'm not sure that I would agree with you. There is precedent for that to be wrong, but I would also say that then you could look at studies coming from that culture that does agree with it and see what those say. And if those seem to consistently say, "Hey, gay people are okay," and every other study is saying no, but they're all coming from like a culture that that has like a lot of homophobia, I think that you could just like look at both of these and say, even though that's the consensus, it seems like the studies might like I don't know. For me to distrust studies, I would just want to find precedent.
At that point, aren't you kind of just looking for the study that agrees with you, though?
But it would depend on where it's from, right? It would depend on the culture that's coming from.
In what way?
So, given your hypothetical, let's say that a lot of we have a consensus that, let's say, like a homophobic consensus that gay people are bad, right? Within the research.
Yeah.
We could apply any trait. We could just say bad. Yeah.
Yeah. X trait.
Yeah, X trait is more common in groups with. Yeah. Anyway, what I would say is if the world is already very homophobic, but we have like a nation over here that does not struggle with homophobia, or another nation over here that doesn't struggle with homophobia, right? Or doesn't have homophobia, and they both seem to have the same results, we could look at that consensus, right? And yeah, it's not the consensus of the world, but it's the consensus of a specific group that might have very different takes on it. And I'd say that like we'd have to look at why they're getting different takes. We'd have to look into the studies, how the studies are conducted, and I would generally follow that if the studies are conducted differently, then maybe there's something to that. But if they're all conducted the same, and they all come to like similar results, I don't know. That's just my take on it. Like, even if there was a false consensus, you could look into specific areas where culturally it's different, and you could see what the consensus coming out of those areas is, and get a broader sense.
I think that could. You were speaking?
Yeah, I do feel like we're kind of shopping for experts that might agree with our initial assertion, though. Like, if we have a bunch of experts that all feel one way, and then we're like, okay, well, we need to go see if we can find some experts that might feel a different way. There needs to be some sort of a way that we can like compare these experts to one another and try to figure out what the actual true consensus is, or what the true like root of this.
Well, yeah, if there's a big bias within the medical community, right? I think that you could find it by reading studies that disagree with the current consensus, and see how the studies are conducted differently. See how the methodology is different. You know, that's what I'm talking about doing. I'm saying that.
I want to bring something in. Okay. When it comes to making historical claims about like gay people or like pedophilia or whatever, you know, like all these things, there was a time and place where this was acceptable, and this is not what we treat to say like, well, overall, like we have just like engaged with these type of things in the history, in the past history of like 200 years or 100 years in this way. No, if you're gonna look way past in history, there are way different ways at how we engage with that. So when it comes to like being gay, right? Like it was totally fine when you were like within my own within Europe, and you were a gay person. You know, it was totally fine during like the Roman times. But that being said, like after a certain time, around like the 1400s, that totally shit. So yeah, so we cannot say like necessarily like that a gay is bad because some culture or whatever. And I felt that this conversation went that way. And yeah, and I also found it kind of crazy because of the fact that we got a true trans people over here, like in this debate, you know. So I wanted to hear you guys' takes on this.
So I could be wrong, but like in regards to the Roman thing, I do know that they defined homosexuality differently. It had to do with whether you were taking the masculine or feminine role within the sexual act. So some of that can like come down to like the different ways in which people define things. And I was going to respond to it's Ashley, right? Earlier. In that, I think one of the big issues with relying on studies to determine whether something is good or bad is that it depends on the language that's used and the specific things that are being measured, if that makes sense. And I think that can necessarily be hijacked by bad actors. Like, I keep going back to that, but it's like it's my big worry with relying on consensus or relying on studies for like what is not really a scientific argument, but is actually an argument about who has the right to do what with their own body. Like, I don't necessarily want to defer to the science on who gets to decide whether or not I have a moral claim to do with my body what I will. You see?
I would say after 18, I'd be on board with that, but we're talking about pre-18.
Yeah. At that point, I think we should defer more or less to the parents in the way that we do right now, just because we don't really necessarily have a better system. Like we could like control for other factors, like say for example, we found that someone wanted gender affirming care and oh look, these two parents spend 90% of their fucking time like browsing turf forums or whatever. So maybe ignore what they say, like. But I think for the most part, just defer to the parents in the way that you normally would, or defer to whatever like societal power structure is generally seen to like be acting on the best interest of the child involved. You know what I mean?
I honestly think you guys are making like a valid point when it comes to like sex and when you can have like consensual sex and that kind of stuff. That being said, like
I mean,
I'm gonna throw in the wrench, right? I'm gonna throw in the wrench. I'm gonna say that casual sex and all these things, like obviously, like an 18-year-old person can be like pretty much like be like taken advantage because of the fact that we have like casual sex and all that kind of stuff. Shouldn't you guys think that we should like actually like raise the age of consent, given that we have all this casual sex and all these different types of things, which can be like predatory for those people, for those people that are just generally trying to find like just love.
I believe in a person's right to make bad decisions. That's basically the entirety of my response.
Yeah, but what if they get raped because of the fact that they got the Tinder date, right? They got a Tinder date and they engage with the Tinder date.
That's on the rapist. That's on the rapist.
Yeah, of course, and yeah. So then you might want to say that you might want to change something up in the law overall, right?
I don't know what I would be changing in the law there. Like, it's already illegal to rape. Like,
Yeah. Do
I'm
you
not
think that? Do you,
like I'm not like pro controlling people. Like, I'm very, very anti-controlling people. I'm an anti-authoritarian. It's
Mhm.
authoritarian in like every conceivable way. Like, it's in my bio. I'm an anarchist.
Yeah. So if somebody like it basically has the is being raped, right, and they didn't know about that because they are like 18 years old or 90 years old, and they are a young person, right?
Wait.
Where,
I need clarification right there. Why would they not know they're being raped because they're 18?
no, I'm saying they're
Oh,
of the age of 18 or 19, and they are engaging in hookup culture, so to speak.
Okay.
But they don't know that they are engaging in hookup culture overall. So they felt that they being trapped in some sort of like like what you call it, like they are being invited to like a hotel room, and they think they are just going to do some chess or something along those lines within that room, right? So would you blame them for going into that room because they just think that are going to do some chess? Do you say that
hold on.
are?
I can
Ooh.
answer your question right now. It's
Okay.
fine for them to go in the room. It's not their fault if they get raped by the person who like tried to bait them into a
I
private
would
situation.
never put the fault on like them. But I'm just saying
like-
that when you talk about that consent, is that people don't know what they are talking about. So when we are talking about like people that are under the age of 18, people don't necessarily know what they are doing. So and that's
I think
why
for the most
we
part they
are
do.
protecting them. We are protecting those people. So I am saying we need to protect more people. We need to hire that age because of the fact that we have casual sex and that kind of stuff. So maybe 21 or something along those lines.
I mean, I don't think casual sex is the same as making like a life-altering decision. Like, sure, casual sex could potentially be a life-altering decision, but like it doesn't like cause the same amount of like societal like it doesn't change the way that society looks at you to anywhere near the degree that transitioning does. Though I'm also not against people getting gender affirming care before they're 18. I just think that maybe there should be a couple stipulations on it. Like, defer to whoever has that person's best interest at heart. So I don't really know what that has to do with like the age of consent and like where it should be. Like, they don't necessarily like they're not comparable, in my opinion.
Yeah. So I generally I we both lost each other. So there you
Ashley,
go.
what's
So,
your
yeah.
thoughts on this, or Guy?
On raising the age of consent, I would generally say that the age of consent in the end is an arbitrary thing that we kind of decide as a culture. So if you would want to raise it, I don't see a reason why it's set at 18. It's kind of arbitrary.
Yeah,
but setting it like I would say saying at 16 would be like equally arbitrary. Saying at 21 would be equally arbitrary. I think it's all kind of arbitrary. So I think that like the exact age of consent, like I would generally, like if I got to decide, I would probably place it between 16 and 21.
But
yeah,
actually,
I don't have strong feelings towards a specific age.
Yeah, actually, so can I ask you a question about that? Because like without disguising my own opinion, but because I'm not actually like talking from my opinion, but it's more about like conservatives are like concerned around like the whole idea of like hookup culture, right? So they are concerned about like people hooking up and that damaging them. So because of the fact that when once you hit like level 18, right? You can go on Tinder, you can do all these things, and it might damage you in the sense that you have this hookup culture, so they don't really like the hookup culture.
Well, yeah,
So-
but the age of consent isn't only sex, right? Like, that's not the only thing that the age of consent lets you do, right? So, I would generally say, yeah, like, if you wanted to raise, like, the issue is the age of consent has a lot of things tied into it. It's not just sex. It's not just, at this age I get to have sex. It's a lot of things, right?
Mhm.
So I would just say that, like, a great example, SRS. I think I think that raising the age of consent, if that would increase the age at which you would like need to be to get SRS, unless there is data that showed that needed to be done for SRS, I would be against that. Because it seems like the data says that 18 is a fine age. So I would worry about the implications of moving the age of consent like back, like making it old, like making it so that you need to be older to have the age of consent. I would worry about like the implications outside of sex. Whereas just for sex, I'm not strong on that. I would want to see more than just the culture of hookup culture. I would want to see like actual data on why we should move that. I'm a very data-driven person, as we've already discussed.
What if somebody brings out like the data to prove you that hookup culture is bad? How would you?
I don't
respond to
engage
that?
in hookup culture, so if it was bad, I would be like, oh, if there's data that says it's bad, I might look into the data. I might check, like, when I was talking about earlier, like, I might look at where it's coming from and check for biases in that way. I might look for studies that say, like, it's good, right, as well, just to get a nuanced view on it. But yeah, if I came away thinking it was bad, then yeah, it's bad. I don't know what you want me to say. I would just side with what the data says. I would look into the studies to make that decision.
I mean,
Okay, yeah, it's just that it happens way more like hookup culture and that kind of stuff. So you need to have like an answer to that. And for some conservatives, they say like, oh, we gotta raise the age of consent because of the fact that hookup culture affects those young people as well, as in they are getting damaged and that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's what's the point that I wanted to bring up, and I wanted to be as much inflammatory as possible as well. But yeah.
I understand where
You did a
Chinchilla's
good
coming
job.
from. I feel like the age of consent, we've got a lot of different ones in the United States. Like at 21, you can consent to go and drink your own beer. At 18, or maybe they've changed it to 21 again, you can consent to smoke cigarettes or buy vaporizer products or whatever you want to do. There is the age of consent of when people can participate in sexual activity. We're talking about the age of consent to when you can choose which type of, I don't want to call them elective surgeries because that's preposterous, but what sort of medical procedures you can go through. And there does seem to be like, there's a lot of different times that you get different rights to consent. I kind of like the idea of maybe we need to create a new age of consent where like teenagers within this particular age group are allowed to participate in sexual activity with other teenagers in this particular age group. But once you get to be an adult, you need to start looking for partners within your own peer group again, which might be a super controversial take. But
I think that's how it works in my state.
yeah, I mean, I understand where you're coming from with it, Chinchilla, that sometimes someone that isn't 18 might not know what's best for them. Sometimes their parents might not know what's best for that child also. And I mean, the state kind of has to step in at some point and say, these are the things that are allowed to happen at this age.
Flo Chase, would you like to say anything?
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt because I had a bit of a. It's a bit of a separate question, so I didn't want to cut off the age of consent discussion. But if we're feeling like it's wrapped up, then there is actually something I wanted to ask Ashley. Thank you, Prime. Okay, yeah. Then,
Dude, just go ahead.
Okay,
Go
I'm sorry.
ahead.
I'm just trying to be nice. Okay, anyways.
Pinata.
Ashley, thank you. Hello. It's great to see you again. Anyways, This is something that I have always sort of struggled, a circle that I've always struggled to square. It's something I've actually talked to Taftaj about. I don't know if you guys know who she is, but I've had a couple of discussions on stream with her before about it. And it is do you ever worry, or I guess just think about the potential of sort of transitioning as reinforcing a gender binary or specific kinds of gender roles? It's something that I've always struggled with because it feels like when this is obviously not something that happens. So the example about the is incredibly hyperbolic. Please don't understand. I'm not trying to say that. I'm trying to say that this is why people transition. But like, I'm sure we can all agree that there's a hypothetical in a world where someone says, "Oh, I'm transitioning to a woman." Why? Oh, I'm really good at cooking and cleaning. Like that would be probably like a really bad thing. And I just wonder sometimes in terms of like the ideas of femininity, and masculinity, if sometimes if the idea of transitioning because you are a man that feels more feminine, if that can sort of unintentionally reinforce a gender binary. It's something I've always really struggled with. So I was just wondering what like your perspective on that was.
I actually have had this discussion many times. I've had close friends that I have argued about this with for many hours. My general position on this is if we lived in a society where gender norms were completely destroyed, right? I still think there might be like physical transition, but I'm not sure that gender transition would be a thing because you wouldn't really need to change your gender. Your gender would just be the exact lineup. But how we're using gender roles right now, it seems to be that we're kind of opening them up, right? Like you look at people always make fun of like there's 52 genders, but it's just like the idea is that there's so many points on a line, right? You could draw a point on any, and as we've understood it as a spectrum more and more, it's kind of opened up that like you can be any point on this line. So I think that saying that I want to transition to female, that's just a general broad area of a line. So I don't see that as reinforcing like genders, like, or a gender binary at all, or gender roles necessarily, because it's just like I'm making those roles. I get to decide what those roles are, and like I don't really care what society thinks.
Okay, I guess then the other sort of direction I would go with that is that do you think that the idea of passing, of attempting to look more feminine or masculine, to be aligned with the sex that the gender is more normally associated with, do you think that that at all could enforce those kinds of almost like a form of like beauty standards of femininity or masculinity? Is that something you've ever thought about?
I really worry about the idea of passing and how we actually fix that, because that's a major problem. I've met, like, that's actually a really difficult question. Where I would, as much as I hate it, I would probably advocate for, making FFS considered a medical surgery.
I'm sorry, what is FFS? I'm really
facial feminization surgery.
Okay.
I would probably advocate for that being considered on the same level as like something like SRI.
Okay.
To allow you, if you wanted to fit into feminine beauty standards, I think that would be fair. Like, I would treat it to like, I would say that for burn victims, right? Like, if you have a major burn, you might want to get corrective surgery to fit into society, even if it's not affecting your ability to live.
Yeah, that's
I would just
totally
compare
fair.
it to that.
Okay. Yeah, I
Where
guess
it's uncomfortable because it's saying, well, you got to change how you look for society, but then it's also like you don't have to. I'm not for that, I'm not for that concept. But like the issue is, we do live in a society where you probably do want paths. Yeah, so I'm saying that we should give paths to that if you want to do that.
Yeah, I guess the struggle that I've always had is that it feels like that sort of engaging in these things in a way sort of does reinforce them, but equally it seems not fair and frankly just incredibly fucked up to ask people to essentially martyr themselves and say like, oh, I'm not going to engage in any of this, I'm going to suffer the harms, because we do live in a society where, needing to look a certain way is like it is something that you can like suffer real societal ill from not doing. So I don't know. It's just something I've always gone back and forth on, because, like you say, with the burn victims, like, I don't want to like force a person to say like, oh, stop reinforcing beauty standards. But meanwhile, like I'm sitting here without having to go through like the pain that they would if they chose to do that.
Yeah, I would just say that like as time goes on, as more and more like trans people and generations of trans people come to be, and as more people just become comfortable with the idea, I think that like it naturally kind of moves in that direction anyway, one trans person getting FFS isn't going to change that.
Yeah, that's
So
sort of
we
been my
should,
feeling as well.
but it could change their life. So we should advocate for that person to have the most options in terms of how they want to transition, how they want to live their life.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there's many trans people I've met that don't want general surgery, like they don't want SRS.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we should accommodate for trans people that any surgeries that trans people want. There's also trans people that don't even want to go on hormones. I respect that. So it's just like I think that like we just should accommodate for all types of trans people.
Yeah, that's a really good response. Thank you.
So, I have a couple thoughts on this. In that, I think that the healthiest way to think about this whole subject, because I've thought about this a bit, is in regards to stuff like FFS or like hormone therapy or bottom surgery or top surgery or anything like that. Is that the healthiest way to think about it going forward? Not necessarily right now, because we're not at a point where we can think about it like this right now, but in the future, think of it as an elective body mod, in the same way that like gauging your ears or getting a tattoo or a piercing or like cosmetic surgery is an elective body modification, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you are like reinforcing an image or reinforcing gender roles. What you're doing with an elective body mod is you are making a concerted effort to change your body in such a way that it better represents your inner sense of self, be that masculine, feminine, punk, goth, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Like, for example, you could have someone get FFS and still identify as a cis man because, I don't know, that's whatever that's how they see themselves, like inside. So I think for the purposes of having a healthy outlook going forward, it would be best to think of it more as elective bodily modifications that you really shouldn't interfere with. Like, you wouldn't interfere with someone choosing to get a tattoo, for example, but you would also want them to understand like the possible repercussions of doing so, if that makes sense.
I definitely wouldn't want to interfere, and I think and I do ultimately side, we should let these people do it, but I don't think that just because an internal image of yourself is what you're seeking to become aligned with, we can necessarily eschew any sort of deeper thinking. I think the reality is that actually, tattoos aren't a good example, but I actually think that a lot of like plastic surgery, and particularly in plastic surgery cultures like America or Brazil, I think that actually these absolutely can reinforce certain kinds of beauty standards. And I wouldn't expect anyone to martyr themselves. I think Ashley is right that we should allow people to do this and still move the needle. It's possible to move that needle without forcing anyone into these really uncomfortable scenarios. But I do still think it is worth to at least it's worth acknowledging and at least like thinking about that. I do think that your internal image can be very modified by beauty standards, and then seeking to align with that can in some ways play into that. It's just that I don't ultimately think we should be having people like martyr themselves, and meanwhile other people don't.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I just want to say that Floater is like, when it comes to like trans people, it's like totally different in the sense that they have like body dysmorphia and that kind of shit, and they wanna fit in. That's basically, they wanna fit in to the norm, and that's what they are trying to do, and this is the sad part, right? So yeah. But yeah, like Ashley, you wanted to talk, so you can talk more. And besides that, like Rain, you can talk more about this than me as well. So yeah,
Ashley.
Oh, I just wanted to be very specific. I'm correcting this term not out of being like, I'm not trying to be mean and correcting this, but I would be very specific in term, because these are different medical terms. It would actually be either gender incongruence or gender dysphoria, depending on what you're going by, instead of body dysmorphia, because body dysmorphia is a very different thing, right?
Yeah.
So you would generally say in like body dysmorphia, it would be the idea is that you're wrong for, or I don't want to say you're wrong, but the perception is wrong. Whereas in dysphoria, we'd say the perception is right. If you like lost your hand and that really bothered you, that would be dysphoria. But like, let's say that you were kind of overweight, right? and you thought that you were like skinny or something, that might be dysmorphia, or if you hated your body for that, that might be dysmorphia. So that kind of makes sense. There would be a distinctive difference there.
Yeah, so
It's a minor thing, but it's a very important thing when you're talking about because
I'm
people.
Dutch. I'm Dutch. I'm extremely dyslexic, and
Oh,
I
I'm
couldn't
sorry.
talk. I couldn't talk until I was 7. So there you go. I'm sorry for that. So
Oh
yeah,
no, I'm not at all trying to
no,
that mistake. I'm just trying to clarify that.
But
it
I
is an
make my
important
mistakes.
distinction.
So
Oh yeah,
then
no.
I make these
I'm-
problems. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm not trying to come off as mean.
No. You're right. So yeah.
Okay. So anyone else have thoughts on that?
So I kind of stand with Flowtrace on a lot of this. I feel like there's a lot of societal harm that's done by our gender standards. I like the correlation between this and like the plastic surgery culture. I feel like there are plastic surgery procedures that as a society we've kind of decided that, you know, if a person is going in for their 4th or 5th breast augmentation, we kind of look at them and we don't tell them, hey, you can't do this, but maybe this isn't the most healthy choice that you're making. And again, I don't know if it's our position to tell these people whether they should or shouldn't be doing these things, but I do feel like society has kind of generally said, hey, wait a minute, we need to look at this. I don't necessarily want anyone to martyr themselves and not go through with something that is going to make them happier, healthier, and have a better life. But at the same time, maybe we need to ask what the goals are in these things, and as a society, try to move toward a more gender abolitionist position.
Mm-hmm.
I do think it's really important to distinguish between the kinds of plastic surgery excesses that we would probably look down upon as being like fundamentally irrational, and that not being the case with surgeries for transgender people to become more passing.
Please,
In
thank
the same,
you.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, no, yeah. Sorry, I just want to clarify that. I know you didn't mean that way. Sorry if I came off that way.
No, thank you for not letting me paint myself poorly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's or sorry, comrade, did you want to go?
No, I was just nodding in agreement.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I think it's really tough because it feels like there is this give and take where, on the one hand, you want people to be happy and healthy within the system, but when people pursue their own goals of like a certain image within the system, that in and of itself has the power to be a standard for other people. I think actually another really good corollary would be like the idea of white beauty standards, actually. I think that's a really good example where you often see the idea of like what is assumed to be the default, like pretty, and especially among women, is a very like white kind of beauty standard that is very biased towards things like white faces and white facial features. And how for a long time, I think especially in like the 2000s, like 2001 up to like 2010, it seemed like there was this like plague of like people of white beauty standards, but sort of in a darker skin tone, that felt like this really cheap and almost frankly quite insidious way of trying to be like, oh yeah, no, we are inclusive, while still reinforcing this really harmful like mindset under the hood, I guess. And I guess and that's just the thing where I think it's really important to acknowledge that possibility as a way to prevent that. But I actually really do think that Ashley just hit the nail on the head. I really do think we are moving in a direction where that's becoming more and more acceptable. Unironically, as much as I don't like it personally, I actually think K-pop has done wonders for this generation in particular, for giving them like an image of like a cool but like frankly more like effeminate kind of man. Because for a long time that has really been looked down upon. I don't remember because I was like 4 when it happened, but when Metal Gear Solid 2 came out, there was a huge divergence between Eastern fans and Western fans, where if you look at a lot of like deep analysis of Metal Gear Solid 2, they'll say things like, oh, you're supposed to think Raiden is lame and isn't cool, whereas Eastern fans are like, oh my god, Raiden is so fucking cool. And I think that it's just it's really important to acknowledge those kinds of things and make sure that we're still moving the needle. But I think we are.
But Flowtrace, can I ask you a question? Because like there has been a lot of like criticism when it comes to like doing makeup and that kind of shit. When it comes to like girls that are doing their makeup in a fashion that is like Asian kind of style, and they look Asian, and like basically me, if you look at my face structure right now, and they paint their picture, like they do their makeup and they do it in an Asian style, and they say that it's like cultural appropriation, or it's like basically like taking over the culture. How do you feel about that?
I think that it is really dangerous to fetishize or really put on a pedestal any kind of beauty
Is that
standard
fetishization? Is that fetishization?
maybe not necessarily. Not necessarily. And for this example, I'll say it isn't. But even just having that as the standard, I think is really dangerous, because it feels like you run the huge risk of alienating people in a very inherent way. I think it's really similar to like height with men, where, you know, there's an argument to be made, you know, with muscle mass versus like fatness. Like this is a lot more malleable when it comes to things like height or facial structure. Not to say that it's okay for those things to be standards, but I think you need to be much more cognizant of things like facial structure or height, or these things that are much harder to deal with, as causing just huge self-hatred and frankly like almost like a borderline form of dysmorphia. I think like skin bleaching is a great example of where this can really get off the rails, where in certain cultures around the world, because whiteness and white skin, white features are seen as so much more pretty, skin bleaching is this procedure where people will legitimately bleach their skin to try and look whiter. So when it comes to like Asian like makeup, I honestly I'm not familiar enough with that example. I guess the only reference I have is that there's a lot of really weird fetishization of Asian women online, but I can't really speak to like Asian like makeup I honestly have no idea about that.
Vanilla, you want to say something?
Yeah, so I guess my question would be kind of like along the lines of what Flow Trace was saying, but I kind of disagree. I don't understand why we would draw a distinction between like any type of plastic surgery or any type of body modification and like the transition surgery. Because I think, like Ashley said earlier, if we're just moving somewhere along the line, then who's to say how far someone can move, or like what's the limit? Like, and again, you said you weren't for stopping these people, but I think you said something along the lines of if a woman got her fourth breast surgery, we would look down upon that, but you wouldn't hold that same standard to someone who was transitioning and got 4 different surgeries. So I'm trying to see why you would have a distinction between the two.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, pardon me. I thought he was addressing me. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I mean, it's for anyone.
I guess I would say that there could hypothetically be a person who is transgender who is pursuing some surgery, and that surgery to be irrational. But I think that it's really dangerous to sort of entertain these kinds of hypotheticals when the reality is that the vast majority, if not all of these surgeries, are not coming from the same place that someone who's getting their 4th like breast augmentation is most of the time. I think that when you look at breast augmentation, I think a much better example to go to would be something like synthahol, where there is an extreme sense of body dysmorphia to the point where they are going to be trying to change their body in ways that are just really outside of the bounds of what we would normally talk about in terms of surgery. And that their expectations, I think it's really key that their expectations are such that they will never be satisfied. Right? When you look at like people who like are on like their 4th like breast augmentation surgery, or you look at people like synthahol, one of the reasons synthahol usually goes wrong is their muscles quite literally explode because they're pumping so much oil into them. And that just isn't true of people that are transitioning and just attempting to be more passing. I think these are like fundamentally different views of what they want their body to be.
Ashley?
I think that, just to answer, and I think you would agree with me here, Flortres, if like you had a hypothetical trans person that was getting like their 5th facial surgery, or like their 4th facial surgery, we would probably say that might be a bit much equally, but we would also say that like maybe we'd be a bit more tolerant of like the first couple surgeries, because it's like, hey, you're literally changing completely. And if you went through male puberty, you probably have to undo it, and just undoing the permanent effects of male puberty isn't that ridiculous given the context. Like if you're a trans woman.
That's a great
Sorry,
example.
I tend to speak from the trans woman perspective and shorthand that. I know I shouldn't, but just because
Yeah,
I'm
but
a trans woman. But like, yeah, like if you got one that they'll sometimes do is a tracheal shave, right? Then facial feminization surgery. And then you could get voice feminization surgery, and you could get breast augmentation surgery, and then you could get SRS, right? And all of those are mainly undoing male puberty. But if you start doubling up on like facial surgery, if you start getting like absurd amounts of breast surgeries, right? I would say that equally as the person that FlowTrace is describing, it could get there, but it generally doesn't get there. It's just undoing something.
Yeah, I think the perfect one-to-one would be someone who a transgender woman who we could say has largely like, completed the process of becoming passing and then
perception.
getting that fourth surgery. Well, everything I say is my perception, bro. Like,
No, but what I'm saying is you're saying, well, they've gone far enough, so now that they want another surgery, they're going too far. But
yes,
that's your perception, and that's no like someone could say, well, going too far is transitioning from a male to a female. You say no, because that's how that person feels, and that's what they want to do with their body. So if a person wants to go from a size A cup to a size H cup and have 4 breast surgeries, I don't see how you can be for one and against the other. If that's what that person wants for their body in order to be happy, if it takes 4 surgeries to do that or 5 surgeries, I don't see why there's a distinction.
I guess I would just say quickly before I go to Commander, before we go to Commander, sorry. I think that number one, I think you can make authoritative claims about what you want your body to be. I don't think we have to throw out the baby with the bathwater and say, oh, well, because we're allowing transgender people to transition, now any sort of surgery is open. And then secondly, I would say that I think the mental well-being of that person is a key component, and that very often these extreme surgeries are accompanied by sort of an ever-shifting target as to what they want to look like, where it will never be enough. And I don't think that either of these are true for transgender people.
Okay. You can go.
Okay. This kind of touches on one of the same things that Vanilla was kind of talking about. And I think there's a bit of a lack of definitive statements in that it's not really being defined like what constitutes too much, what is to be done about it, where is the line in which harm is drawn, and who makes these decisions. Like, if the line is drawn where harm starts being caused to the individual, then any person who's a good enough rhetorician would be able to forbid any elective procedure, as long as they were able to make a strong case as to why they think that the procedure is harmful. So I just want to, I kind of am interested to know, like, where is the line? What is to be done after someone crosses the line? And what is to stop that from being hijacked by very intelligent bad actors who have a vested interest in preventing people from being able to do things that they perceive as being bad or whatever, be it like a conservative who just hates trans people but has like spent a fucking decade writing up an essay on why you shouldn't do gender confirming surgery or what have you. I'd like more like definitive answers to those kind of questions.
Well, I would simply point to the idea that there can be a point where dysphoria, at least in trans women, becomes dysmorphia, right? And I would generally say that somebody with body dysmorphia, we shouldn't always entertain like their desires for like facial surgeries, plastic surgeries, or plastic surgeries. And why I would say that is because if you have body dysmorphia, it might you might be aiming for a literal impossible body, and what's going to end up happening is you might start spiraling. So I would more so I wouldn't like put an absolute limit on it ever, right? Like I'm not for like putting an absolute limit on it, but I would also say that like we should examine why somebody might want to get like H cup breasts, you know? I think that's reasonable to ask. Well, are you going to be content with that? And yeah, you could have people that might go, yeah, I would be. That's all I want, right? But you might have other people that are like, no, I want to keep going bigger until I like die of oversized breasts or whatever, you know? You could have people that want to just keep going, and that's where it tends to become like body dysmorphia. Like they're never going to get where they want to go, and that's the worry.
I see what you're saying. My concern lies with, like, I've heard, like, due to living in like a fairly conservative area of my state, I've heard a lot of arguments to the effect of these surgeries that trans people tend to get being like indicative of self-loathing or of body dysmorphia. And I think that by making the distinction as to, well, these people are able to get these surgeries because they're doing it because of X reason, whereas these people are not able to get these surgeries, or at least like gate kept from getting these surgeries because of Y reason, you can kind of make it prone to there being people will argue that X reason is actually Y reason. Like a strong enough someone who is strong enough at logic and rhetoric would be able to convince the doctor or whoever is in charge of making this decision, whoever is in charge of permitting this, that the one who is not going overboard is in fact going overboard. Now, I don't necessarily think this is correct. I just think it's a possibility, and that's kind of why I am not necessarily for drawing this line, because I think you can argue in favor of drawing the line, but I think that by drawing this line as to who is going to have the agency and who is not going to have the agency, you run the risk of removing agency from people who should in fact have it. So I think you're running less of a risk by just allowing people to make bad choices, by allowing people to engage in behavior that might necessarily be self-destructive. I like, while I don't want people to behave in a self-destructive way, I also don't think that we should have the right to like stop them from doing so.
So
I wouldn't forbid someone from drinking because they have depression, for example, even though I know that they might be drinking because they hate themselves, or they're atoning for their past sins, or whatever the reason is. I don't believe that any one of us, and I especially don't believe that the state has the right to revoke someone's ability to make poor life choices. I think that's like inherently authoritarian, because I think it's the same arguments that authoritarians tend to use in regards to the oppression of the people under their rule.
I feel like, I mean, there are life-saving surgeries, and then there are surgeries that people choose to undergo for psychological reasons. And I feel like there needs to be some sort of a psychological evaluation when these decisions are being made to ensure that the people making these decisions are making the decisions for the right reasons, or that they are sure that they want to make the decision that they want to make. So again, I don't want to try to create a rule where it's okay for these people and it's not okay for these people. But I do feel like we need to make sure that the reason people are wanting to go through with these things, or that their motivations are the right motivations. And again, now we need a panel of experts to determine what the right motivations are and what the wrong ones might be.
I super agree. I totally see where you're coming from, comrade, but I think that you absolutely should be cognizant of when you're making arguments that can be twisted. But I think that the correct thing to do is to say, and I want to be really clear here, I'm not saying that this means you can use this to deny a transgender person surgery when they're transitioning. But I think that, frankly, I think that issuing the line, saying that, oh, let's not have any line, I think that's going to give more ammo to like right-wing people than like saying the line exists ever would. I think that when you look at like how people typically like attack the transgender like movement, it's typically with things like they think that anybody should should be able to transition. They want 2-year-olds to be able to transition. And I think that saying, oh, any surgery is fine, I think that's really not a good idea. And I think it's also just a problem because there are people that are going to sometimes engage in surgeries that are bad for them, and we should put our foot down. I think the idea that the state shouldn't revoke the ability of people to make bad choices for themselves, I definitely think there's some places where we absolutely, we're not going to let you sign yourself into indefinite slavery. I'm sorry, but that's just not going to happen in the United States of America. And so, and similarly, I think particularly when we're talking about the medical apparatus, which the state has a lot of involvement in, and frankly should have more involvement in, I'm sure we all agree. Well, most of us would agree. I don't want to, assume anyone's positions. I think that there is a lot of legitimate ground for this government to start saying things like, no, you are not going to be able to get your 20th synthahol surgery to inject your muscles with oil. This is legitimately very damaging to you.
Yeah, I definitely see where you're coming from. I just still consistently have the worry of it being hijacked by bad actors,
I mean, I think bad actors are going to be able to hijack a lot of things at the end of the day.
That's very true. I understand your argument about not wanting to give the right wing ammunition. However, I don't necessarily think that I am giving them ammunition, in that even if this were not the talking point that I were to use, they would just find a different one. You know what I mean? They're going to have their talking points, whatever it may be. They have groups of people, they have think tanks dedicated to coming up with excuses to oppress the greatest number of people possible.
I agree, but there's a reason they pay those think tanks a lot of money, and that is that it is a genuinely difficult and requires skill in order to find the best way to make those attacks. And I don't think, there's this argument sometimes in the left, they're going to call us socialists no matter what. It's true that your Tucker Carlsons are going to call you socialists no matter what, but those Biden Youngkin voters are real. The moderates in the middle that can be swayed either way are real, and I don't think that we should just give up on those people or assume they don't exist. And I think that giving them, saying that we should not have any surgeries be banned, I think it is exactly the kind of ammunition that they're looking for to try and make their case against us. But I guess that's just me.